Welcome to today's Explainer. We are jumping right into a deeply emotional, age-old theological paradox. It's one of those questions that has literally kept philosophers, theologians, and, just everyday people awake at night for centuries. Why do terrible things happen to incredibly good people? And on the flip side, why do folks who seem to completely ignore any sort of moral compass often live these lives of absolute luxury and comfort? Well, in the incredibly dense source material we're unpacking today, there's a fascinating and honestly kind of terrifying answer proposed. We're going to break down the architecture of this argument, looking at how the source frames human suffering, cosmic justice, and this chilling psychological metaphor about the nature of sin. So, settle in, because we're about to see how comfort itself might just be the ultimate trap.
Just listen to this raw, agonizing observation straight from our source. You're the nicest person I know, you have dementia. The material doesn't kick off as some high-minded philosophical theory. It starts right here, with this visceral heartbreak. This isn't abstract at all, right? It's the real, tangible pain of witnessing unjust suffering. It perfectly captures that absolute devastation of watching someone who has lived a life of total kindness, someone who has seemingly done everything right, just being slowly erased by an illness. These words highlight that profound, gut-wrenching sense of unfairness that really drives the entire framework we're about to explore. It roots our whole inquiry in pure, unfiltered human grief.
Okay, let's dive into the stark contrast the source establishes. On one side of the ledger, we have the believer. According to the text, this is someone who has prayed, believed their entire life, never intentionally did anyone wrong, and is widely considered the absolute nicest person around. Yet, their so-called reward in this life, the suffering of dementia? Then, on the other side, we've got the non-believer. The source bluntly characterizes this person as the meanest individual, and yet they are living what's described as a perfect life. It's a side-by-side comparison that completely shatters our basic, everyday expectations of karma or immediate cosmic justice. The source is essentially forcing us to confront the fact that, at least in the short term, the math of morality just doesn't seem to add up. Good behavior gets met with tragedy, while bad behavior gets a total free pass.
Explain that to me. It's a demand, it's a plea. Honestly, it is the cry of humanity directed straight at the universe. When we see the fundamental injustice we were just talking about, this really is the only logical response. The source uses this exact question as a structural fulcrum of its entire argument. It just lets that tension hang right there in the air. I mean, how do you reconcile a just universe with the reality of a good person losing their mind to disease, while a cruel person just coasts through an easy life? I'm going to let that sit with you for a second. Because from this place of deep, almost angry confusion, the source material pivots hard to offer a very specific, traditional theological answer.
To answer that desperate plea, the source takes a major pivot. It proposes that what we perceive as just this random, unfair distribution of suffering and comfort, it's actually not random at all. Instead, it is the result of a deliberate, calculated spiritual strategy. By viewing the world through this specific theological lens, the seemingly upside-down nature of who prospers and who suffers begins to take on a very intentional, even if it is deeply unsettling, logic. Now, what's really interesting about this is how it completely flips our standard understanding of a good life right on its head. The source explicitly defines this dynamic as a tactic. Sometimes the devil allows people to live a life free of trouble because he doesn't want them turning to God. Talk about a profound reframing. In this view, a perfect, trouble-free life isn't a reward for good behavior, and it definitely isn't just blind luck. It's actually a strategic mechanism. The logic here is that we, as human beings, are mostly wired to seek spiritual help or look for a higher power when we're in distress. So if you remove that distress, if you just pump someone's life full of endless comfort, wealth, and ease, you remove the very catalyst for spiritual seeking. In this theological framework, handing someone a perfect life is literally the most effective way to keep them spiritually isolated.
Building on that wild concept of weaponized comfort, the source then moves into the second half of its argument. It shifts focus to some incredibly visceral psychological imagery. To truly explain how a perfect life can actually be a spiritual danger, the text introduces the metaphor of the comfortable cell. This imagery is perfectly designed to help us visualize the unseen, internal state of someone caught up in this dynamic. It takes this huge, abstract concept of sin or spiritual isolation and grounds it in a physical space that we can all easily imagine, setting up a deeply unsettling paradox. Let's look really closely at the precise wording the source uses here. A sin is like a jail cell, except it all nice and comfy. Just think about what actually defines a jail cell. The defining characteristic is confinement, right? It's the absolute loss of your freedom. But our standard mental image of a cell is, cold, hard, and absolutely miserable.
The source brilliantly subverts this by making the cell nice and comfy. This illustrates a truly terrifying illusion. The confinement is 100% real, the boundaries are totally solid, but because the immediate environment is so pleasant, the prisoner doesn't even realize they're a prisoner. The comfort effectively masks the terrifying reality of their imprisonment. It is an environment entirely designed to pacify.
And right here is the psychological consequence of that pacification, and there doesn't seem to be any need to leave. This is such a chilling observation by the source. The ultimate danger of the comfortable cell isn't just the walls themselves, it's what the comfort actually does to the human will. It entirely neutralizes that primal urgency to escape. Think about it. If you're cold, hungry, and miserable, every single ounce of your energy goes toward breaking out. But if you have everything you could ever want, if your life is perfect and free of trouble like we discussed earlier, why on earth would you ever try the door? The whole strategy relies on the prisoner actively choosing to remain confined simply because the captivity is so aggressively pleasant. Complacency, literally, becomes the heaviest chain.
Watching this whole thing play out over time reveals a terrifying progression. In Phase 1, the individual is just sitting there, totally enjoying the nice, comfy cell of their perfect life. Then, Phase 2 reveals the ultimate trick. The door remains wide open. The illusion of freedom is flawlessly maintained. They could technically leave at any point, choose a different path, seek something higher, but because of all that comfort, they just don't. Then we hit the critical juncture. One day, time runs out. The source suggests there is a very real, inevitable endpoint to this worldly comfort. And then, suddenly, the cell door slams shut. That open door was only temporary. The illusion of freedom collapses in an instant, finally revealing the true, inescapable nature of the trap.
And suddenly, it's too late. These final, abrupt words from our source text bring a pretty violent conclusion to the metaphor. We go from a whole lifetime of open doors and endless, comfortable days straight to an instantaneous slam. There's no warning bell. There's no gradual closing of the door to politely let the prisoner know their time is almost up. The real tragedy depicted here is that sudden, completely irreversible realization of confinement right at the exact moment the option to leave has been permanently revoked. The comfort is gone, the illusion is completely shattered, and the cold reality of the trap is literally all that remains.
So, what does this all mean for us? The absolutely crucial point here is how this framework forces a complete reevaluation of our priorities. We started this explainer with the genuine agony of a good person suffering, and the source answered by revealing the hidden, spiritual danger of a bad person prospering. It suggests that a life entirely free of friction, pain, or need might actually not be a blessing at all. Instead, it could be an incredibly effective strategy to keep you comfortably separated from any real spiritual growth, right up until time runs out, which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative thought that you want. Take a hard look at the comfort in your own life. Is it a solid foundation that helps you grow and help others? Or, according to the stark theological warning of our source today, is your perfect life actually a comfortable cell with a closing door? Thank you so much for exploring this with us today. Keep asking those tough questions, and we'll see you next time.